Advanced stuff, discovering and using .NET classes. Now, PowerShell is built on the Microsoft .NET framework, and PowerShell commands tend to use underlying bits of the framework. So you've been using the .NET framework all along. What we're going to talk about in this nugget is kind of diving underneath the PowerShell commands and using bits of the .NET framework directly, often to accomplish things that you don't have a direct PowerShell command for. There is a ton of functionality in the framework. Understand that the deeper you get into the framework, though, the more that what you're doing becomes, well, it's basically C# programming. And it's not that you can't do that in PowerShell, but there are times when you're going to have to decide if PowerShell is still the right tool, or if maybe you're getting complicated enough and using enough of the .NET framework directly that it wouldn't be easier to use something like Visual Studio that's designed for that type of environment. But I'm just going to stick with PowerShell and show you some neat tricks and a few things you can do for using the .NET framework. So we've got three ways we're going to do this. We'll start by showing you how to discover the .NET classes that exist and their documentation. Fortunately, it's a pretty straightforward process. Microsoft has done a good job of documenting these little puppies. Now, there's two ways that you interact with them. One is by running static members, and that can be static methods and static properties that achieve things without actually creating a specific instance of the .NET class in memory. In other words, it's kind of native functionality. Then I'll show you how to use instance members, so instance properties and instance methods that actually do require you to spin up a copy of the code in PowerShell's memory so that you can access these things. And I'm also going to show you in the documentation how to differentiate between the two, so you'll know when to do each type of approach. So the first question that I usually try to answer for folks when it comes to .NET is the question, where do I find what is in .NET? Well, you come here to MSDN library, msdn.microsoft.com/library. This is where Microsoft documents all this stuff. Now look, there's kind of the core framework, and then there's the bits of the framework that are added by other tools like Office and SharePoint, and that's why over here you'll see this all broken down. So we're going to dive into .NET development. Now you do need to know what version of the framework you're running on your computer. I've got 4.5 installed. Maybe it's just 4. Anyway, we're going to go to 4. And then you just start kind of browsing the framework. You just kind of start looking, and I got to tell you, there are tens of thousands of classes in the .NET framework. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit more effective to do a search, I think. For example, if I did .NET framework, let's say I wanted to do some math functionality. Math. I might just punch that in and hope for the best. Hope for the Bing. And ideally, you're going to get a hit like this one, the math class. Oh man, it's going to be like going to math class. Make sure that you've picked the version you are actually going to be playing with on your computer. If you're looking at 4.5 but you're using 4.0, you might see some differences, so you can change that. But let's just scroll down here. And this has got a bunch of methods. Now there's a trick to look for here. So you'll notice all these things, like ABS is the absolute value of an integer, arc sines, cosines, cos, exponents, logarithms, max, all kinds of crazy stuff. Notice this big red S. If I hover it, it'll say static. So there's really two types of members of a class. So members include properties and methods. And then there's two types of properties and methods. There are static ones and instance ones. Let's start with the static ones. So here in PowerShell, let's make this a little small so we can kind of see everything. First of all, we need to know the full class name of this. The full class name is system.math. Now, most of the time in PowerShell, you can eliminate the system dot and just include whatever comes after it. We're going to do both ways. System dot, and it should tab complete if it's working. There we go. If you are trying to use a static member, you put 2 colons immediately after that closing square bracket. So the square bracket includes the type name. Colon means I'm going to access a static member. Then you put the member name, give it whatever arguments it wants. So the absolute value of -10 is 10. That's all that is. Let's look at fields too. Fields are basically like properties, only this is static. See, and it's called pi. So that means we should be able to, I'm going to leave the system off this time. We should just be able to do math, : pi. There you go. These should tab complete too. Yeah. See, it's trying to tab complete between the pow method. That's funny. Pow. Wham, bam, pow. And the pi field. So that's how you use a static class of something. And you'll find a lot of those. You know, another good one is, let's see, .NET Framework, DNS. Let's just go to DNS. The DNS class. And then let's look and see. So this is system.net.dns. And we've got some static members. Get host addresses. Yeah, you know what? What the heck? Let's try that. So this was system.net.dns. I love to use tab completion because if you're tab completing and you're not getting what you want, then you're doing it wrong. Get host addresses for bing.com. And let's see if you get here into the documentation, get host addresses. What does this accept? It wants a system.string, which is the host name to resolve. Okay, so that's what we've got here is a string. Drum roll, please. Whoa, once it works, it really pops right in there. So this produced the IP address in a string format. This is probably some binary representation of it. So that's how you can use a static method. Those are pretty straightforward. So that's static. Static methods, static properties. Let's see if there's any static properties on this thing. Let's go back to the main documentation. It looks like, see over here in the tree view, it just says methods. So it looks like the only static thing it has is methods. Yep. And then in the description, this tells you this is a static class. That means everything on it is static. And if you look, every single one of these members has got the big red S. So that means you never have to load this into memory. You never have to create an instance of this. You can just use it statically right there at the command line. Now the other type of member is an instance member, and that means you've actually got to you got to create an instance. You've got to well, here, it's easier to show you. And so for this example, I've pulled up the documentation for the system.net.webRequest class. Now, when I look at the documentation for this, one of the first things I notice over here is that it has constructors. A constructor is kind of a special method that you call when you create a new copy of this thing, a new instance of this thing. So let's start by taking a look at those constructors. It looks like we have two. This constructor does not take any input arguments. I can tell that because those parentheses are empty, and that simply initializes a new instance. Now, with some .NET Framework classes, the only way to get a new instance is to provide it with some information. In this case, we have a version that doesn't require anything for us to spin up a new copy. The other constructor requires a bunch of stuff that I don't feel like understanding right now, so heck with it. Let's pop open PowerShell here. And web equal, so I'm just creating a variable to save this instance into, and I'm going to use new object. And the type name is a system, and tab completion should work here, .net.web, web request. If you needed to provide input arguments, you would do that with an argument list. Because this doesn't need any, I can just hit enter. Oh, a constructor cannot be found. Really? Duh. Web request class, web request constructor. Let's look at this thing. This is, in fact, a system.net.webRequest. And see here? I love this. I love it when Microsoft does this. I swear I do. Don't use the constructor. This is like having a button mounted on the wall that says, please do not push this button. So we're supposed to use the create method to initialize new web request instances. I swear. I hate computers sometimes. All right, well, let's go looking at methods. There's the properties, there's the methods. All right, so we've got two different versions of create. One takes a string, which I'm guessing is it's the URI, and the other takes a URI object. Okay, fine. So it turns out we're not going to use web request or new object. That's ridiculous. All right, system .net .web request. And going back to the docs here, this create is a static method, right? There's the big red S. So we should be able to do create, and I'll give it a URL. What do you think? cbtnuggets.com? Yeah, sound fun? Oh, we probably should put in the full URI. HTTP. There we go. Ah, that got us a web request. All right. So let's pipe that to get member and see what we got to play with. Now, this list should be the same thing that we've got over here, the same properties and methods. Notice in this case, we've actually got methods that do not have the big red S. So those are static ones. I can only run those once I have an instance. Well, what's in my $web variable is an instance. So let's see what we've got. Get response. This should return a response to an internet request. Now that is a method. That's what the little fast-moving purple block symbol means. What does the suitcase mean? It's kind of a weird symbol. Oh, you're allowed to use that if you're writing a .NET Windows Store app. Well, we're not, so I don't care. So let's just say web.getResponse. Yeah? Now, I'm guessing that we're going out to cbtnuggets.com and retrieving the front page of the website. So yeah, that looks like that's, so this returned a whole big object. All right, well, let's do it again. Let's save that object in a variable. Yeah, it goes quicker the second time, probably because it's cached. Now let's look at that. And we've got whole bunches of stuff. The server was NuggetServe 8.88. The response URI came from here. That means we weren't redirected. HTTP 1.1 is the protocol. And we've got some headers. We had a lot of content here. So 78 kilobytes of content roughly. So let's pipe that to get member. And it looks like we've got properties that allow us to get to various things like the protocol version, the status code. What else have we got here? We've got a few methods. Yeah, we got close, we got the response header, get the response stream. So all sorts of fun stuff there. Content length, content type, cookies, headers. Let's just look at response.headers. I'm curious to see what's in there. Okay, so those were the headers. Sure, what was the date of that? Nothing. It wasn't populated. We just had the headers. So anyway, that's kind of how you use this thing. Once you've got an instance, you can start calling instance methods and instance properties. Let's look at some of the properties that were in here. Pre-authenticate, proxy. This is where you could set up a proxy you wanted it to use. There's the request URI. You could attach credentials to it. Those are all things that you would set up before you actually asked it to run the get response method and actually go out to the web server and get the response. We've also got just a few other things. Get response async. You'll see a lot of these things. And this basically is going to get into deeper programming. It means you're going to tell it to go get a response, but then you're immediately going to start waiting for events where it says, okay, I got some. That's more complex than we're going to get into here. But no, I think that's a good look at instantiating classes using static methods, static properties, as well as using instance members. So I've shown you how to use the MSDN library to discover .NET classes and documentation, although nothing replaces a good Google or Bing search for finding what you need quickly. We then looked at using static members, and I used math and DNS as examples. And we looked at using instance members, which means you've got to use new object to create an instance of the class, a live copy of it in memory, and then you can access those instance members. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.